In the beautiful country of Scotland, a young lad was born named William Wallace. Scotland is a country north of England, and for the longest time it was ruled by England and a king named Edward the Longshanks. Longshanks was a brutal and evil king who despised the Scots and anyone who opposed his rule and his laws. He acted harshly to anyone who rose up against him, and such is the story of William Wallace and his journey to freedom. William lost his father and brother at a very young age and went to live with his uncle far away. His uncle taught him all sorts of new things, like how to read, write, and speak several different languages. Once William learned to use his head, his uncle Argyle taught him to use the sword. Once William was old enough, he ventured back to his homeland and back to his old friends. It was at a celebration that he ran into his old childhood friend Amish, and they tested their might and strength by throwing large boulders as far as they could. Amish was a giant man, and of course he could throw the heavy boulder further than William. But William made a joke of it and hit Hamish right in the nose with a rock, and Hamish was knocked silly. They laughed and they hugged, and it was good to be home. William was not home long when he fell back in love with a young girl he knew a long time ago. They snuck out into the forest and were married in secret under the stars. Life was good for a short time, until English soldiers took his wife away and sent her to Longshanks, never to be seen again. After hearing this, Wallace rode his horse through the middle of the town with his hands on his head to show that he was unarmed. As soon as he was close enough to the soldiers, he reached behind his long, flowing hair and he pulled out a sword. He sliced and diced, swung and gashed through the soldiers. He climbed the castle walls and tossed the English soldiers off the walls and onto the ground. When his fellow Scots saw this, they ran to help Wallace right away. They took out and destroyed the English soldiers, who ruled over them unfairly for so long. They too stormed the castle, and finally the man who was in charge was thrown off the tallest wall of the castle. The town was now free of English rule, but Wallace had a dream that all of Scotland should be free from Longshanks and his evil rule. Wallace and his men ran through the beautiful Scottish countryside and came upon a group of English soldiers. They battled the men and won easily and took their uniforms. The next day they rode in disguise into another castle. Wallace and his men were let right in, and once they were in, they took off their disguises and they captured the men in the castle. Wallace found the leader, or the lord, that was in charge of enforcing Longshanks' terrible and evil laws. Wallace threw him off of a high wall, and he was done. Wallace then stood in front of the rest of the English soldiers and spared their lives, but told them to go back to Longshanks with a message. Then he burned the entire castle to the ground.
Go back to England and tell them there that Scotland's daughters and her sons are yours no more. Tell them Scotland is free.
News of Wallace and his men's victories reached Longshanks, and he was not happy. He sent soldiers out to look for Wallace and his men with orders to burn every town and village along the way. The soldiers did as Longshanks commanded, but they did not last long. Wallace and his men caught up to them and destroyed every last one of them. It was after this that William Wallace's legend grew and people began to follow him, and his army grew by hundreds and thousands. William needed all the men he could get as word that Longshanks sent a large number of soldiers to a place called Stirling Bridge. Scottish soldiers led by the nobles stood on the field and watched an ocean of English soldiers march in perfect unison across the field. The ground rumbled with each step, and they were outnumbered 3-1. It'd be an impossible task to fight and win. The Scottish soldiers were so scared that they threw down their weapons and they started to walk away. But then William Wallace rode in on horseback with blue paint covering his face, and everyone wanted to see this man, the legend that they had heard about. He looked at his countrymen and spoke with passion and conviction about freedom and why they should fight alongside him. With his words, the Scots raised their weapons high and gave out a loud roar that echoed across the field into the ears of the English army.
Oh! The English are too many!
Sons of Scotland, I am William Wallace.
William Wallace is 7 feet tall.
Yes, I've heard. He kills men by the hundred. And if he were here, he'd consume the English with fireballs from his eyes. I am William Wallace. And I see a whole army of my countrymen here in defiance of tyranny. You've come to fight as free men, and free men you are. What will you do without freedom? Will you fight? No! We will run! And we will live. Aye. Fight and you may die. Run and you'll live. At least a while. And dying in your beds many years from now, would you be willing to trade all the days from this day to that for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom?
Wallace gave the Scottish nobles a battle plan to follow, and follow they did. The English blocked out the sun with so many arrows, the ground shook with their 300 men on horseback, and their men charged on foot. But it was the Scottish army led by William Wallace that won the day. They blocked the arrows with their shields, they stopped the men on horseback with long spears, and they won the battle on the ground. William and his men were victorious again, and the Scottish rebellion was strong as ever. William was knighted by one of the most powerful men in Scotland, a man who could be king of Scotland if Wallace was successful. His name was Robert the Bruce. Robert admired Wallace because he fought with passion, and his men followed Wallace into battle with love and belief in the cause. He wanted to help Wallace any way that he could. Wallace walked out and rode with his army south with their sights set on destroying a city called York. The castle was well guarded and protected by a huge gate with solid wooden beams, and it was almost impossible to break down. Wallace and his men used a big tree as a battering ram to bash the gate over and over and over again. The English soldiers threw rocks and shot arrows at Wallace and his men, but they were determined and finally were able to break through the gate, and the Scots were now in the city. They ran through, cutting down all the Englishmen that served Longshanks. Longshanks was running out of patience. He needed to do something, or else other countries would see him as weak. He sent the Princess of France to try and pay William Wallace to stop this, but he refused. He didn't want money or land or titles. He wanted Scotland to be free of English rule and free of Longshanks. They wanted freedom to govern themselves. The princess admired and believed in William's cause. So she told William about a secret plan that Longshanks had to send his entire army around behind William Wallace and trap him. William thanked the lady for her help, and he rode to the Scottish nobles to get their help and their men for battle. He walked right into the nobles' meeting and asked for their help, and he shook hands with Robert the Bruce. He then took his men to the battlefield where Longshanks himself was waiting. William saw all of his men and the men from the Scottish nobles, but he did not see Robert the Bruce's men. The battle started, and when William gave the nobles the signal to attack, they turned their horses around and rode away, leaving William and his men doomed to be destroyed. William's men attacked on their own, but they were outnumbered. The ruthless and evil King Longshanks gave the order for archers to shoot arrows into the battlefield, even hitting his own men in the process.
Archers.
I beg pardon, sire. Won't we hit our own troops?
Yes, but we'll hit theirs as well. We have reserves. Attack!
William and his men fled, but not before William saw that Robert the Bruce was sitting on a horse alongside Longshanks. He had betrayed William, and even though he betrayed William, he felt sick to his stomach about this betrayal, and he vowed to never be on the wrong side again.
Lands, titles, men, power, nothing.
Nothing.
I have nothing. Men fight for me, because if they do not, I throw them off my land and I starve their wives and their children. Those men who bled the ground red at Falkirk, they fought for William Wallace, and he fights for something that I've never had. And I took it from him when I betrayed him, and I saw it in his face on the battlefield. And it's tearing me apart. I want to believe, as he does, I will never be on the wrong side again.
William was angry that he lost a lot of men in battle, and he was injured himself. Although he lost the battle, his legend grew more and more each day, and more men came to follow him. Longshanks knew that he would replenish his army and not give up, so he sent assassins to eliminate William. William got word of this from the Princess of France. With her warning, he was able to escape their trap. This was the second time she helped Wallace, and he thanked her. She looked deep into his eyes, and they shared a kiss, and they both knew that it was love. With William's legend growing and his army growing by the day, the Scottish nobles requested a meeting with William to finally unite and fight as one army of Scotland. Remember, these are the same nobles that betrayed William at an earlier battle, but William saw that there was no chance of beating England and winning their freedom without the nobles or without Robert the Bruce. William rode cautiously into town for the meeting, and he looked down and he saw Robert the Bruce waiting for him with a smile. He was happy to see William, and he's excited to join forces finally. Suddenly, 100 English soldiers ran out of hiding and clubbed William and knocked him out. Robert the Bruce ran over to William, and he tried to cover him up, but he was also clubbed. Robert the Bruce was betrayed by the nobles, and they gave William Wallace to Longshanks. There was nothing Robert the Bruce could do. William appeared before the people of England, and they demanded that he apologize for his rebellion against the king and swear his allegiance to Longshanks. William did no such thing. He stood his ground while people threw food at him, while he was clubbed and hurt over and over again. His body was failing, his eyes were dimming, and his will to survive was gone. The crowd grew quiet as they expected his last words to ask for mercy from the king. William gathered his last breath, and with it he shouted freedom for all to hear. His voice echoed through the city and reached the bedroom chamber of a sick and weary King Longshanks. This was the last thing the evil king heard before he closed his eyes for the last time.
Cry out. Mercy. The prisoner wishes to say a word.
Although William was gone, Robert the Bruce, who swore never to be on the wrong side ever again, spoke to William's men, and they honored William's cause and sacrificed for the people of Scotland. Robert charged with his men into battle against the English and won their freedom.
You have bled with Wallace! Now bleed with me!
In the year of our Lord, 1314, patriots of Scotland, starving and outnumbered, charged the fields of Bannockburn. They fought like warrior poets. They fought like Scotsmen and won their freedom.
The end.